Welcome to Down the Garden Path. I'm your host, Joanne Shaw, landscape designer and plant lover. I enjoy discussing down-to-earth tips and advice to help you seasonally manage your garden and landscape. And I also aim to bring you interesting and relevant topics to educate you all about the landscaping and horticultural industry. Welcome to Down the Garden Path. Thank you for joining me here today. Today, I am reintroducing you to a past show that my past co-host and I did all about ground covers. I think the hottest topic I see, well, there's quite a few right now, in that, everybody, of course, wants low maintenance. Everybody wants to do the best thing they can do with their garden, but they're tired of mulching. And they're tired of having issues with their lawn. So there's lots of questions on, switching to a different lawn blend or micro-clover, some of which I've tried and I've recommended to clients and I've recommended on the show. But Kathy Jentz is the editor and publisher of the award-winning Washington Gardener magazine, and she hosts the popular GardenDC podcast, and she has written a book called Groundcover Revolution. And Matt and I interviewed her in the past, and I think her book and the topic is still very relevant today. So have a listen. I hope you enjoy the show and come up with some ideas for how you can transform an area in your yard that's giving you some trouble with ground covers. The traditional lawn has received a lot of heat over the last few years, with many recommending alternatives such as micro-clovers and specialized lawn blends. Tonight, we're joined by Kathy Jentz, author of Groundcover Revolution, to discuss which ground cover plants you can use to create a beautiful lawn alternative of your own. Have you replaced your lawn with alternatives? What plants did you use? Perhaps you have a ground cover question for Kathy. We'd love to hear from you. Write us at downthegardenpathpodcast@hotmail.com.
Just before Kathy joins us on the show, a little bit about Kathy. Kathy Jentz is editor and publisher of the award-winning Washington Gardener magazine, based in Washington, D.C. She hosts the popular GardenDC Podcast and is co-author of The Urban Garden and author of Groundcover Revolution. Welcome to the show, Kathy.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Matthew and Joanne.
You're welcome. We're excited about this topic for sure. We've done a lot of shows, but this is a great topic and with a great book.
Thanks. Well, yeah, I can't wait to get into it, especially with two designers, because that's going to give a little bit different than a lot of the gardeners I've been talking to.
Interesting.
Very nice. Well, why don't we start off? What inspired you to write all about ground covers and lawn alternatives?
So my journey was typical homeowner. I went from a condo where I was gardening like crazy and then got my hands slapped by the condo board or HOA because I was starting to garden in the not my area of the condo. And I was like, you know what? Probably time for me to get a little house with a little bit of land of my own. So I found the smallest house I could on a little bit a urban lot, and it's kind of like a pie-shaped wedge corner, very busy, and it was grass from sidewalk to foundation when I moved in. And I was like, this mowing is for the birds. I hate it. If you've ever experienced a Washington, D.C. summer, you know that it is not a very pleasant task to be out there in the heat and humidity and mowing. And I was like, for what? I'm not enjoying this grass. I'm not doing anything. So one of my first tasks was getting rid of all the lawn I could as quickly as I could. And we could probably get into it a little bit later how I did that. But one of my techniques was to go around to different garden club meetings and plant swaps and on lists online. And if somebody said they had a plant that was an aggressive spreader, or they had a little warning with it, could take over your garden, I was like, yes, that plant is for me. And then I quickly found out that is called a ground cover. And so I was doing tons of experiments with one ground cover over another and to see what could battle it out with the English ivy I'd inherited in the back where there wasn't turf grass, and what would hold its own on a slope or on a busy corner with traffic. So I was doing a ton of experimenting over the years, and that's kind of how the book evolved.
So you've gathered these plants, and you're using the term ground cover. So sometimes it's very self-explanatory. Ground cover sounds like it covers the ground, but could you define what is a ground cover for our listeners, or is it just as simple as you say? It's just something that covers the ground.
Yeah, so it could be as simple as that. And my definition is it covers the ground thickly enough that it can suppress weeds and hold in the soil, and has some integrity to it. Because a lot of plants, a lot of perennials can cross the line between ground cover or not. But, if it's like a spindly little growth, like say Brazilian verbena, that's not going to be a good ground cover. But there are some shrubs, perennials, and even annuals that act as good ground covers. And so it just depends on right plant, right place, right?
Okay. Do you consider like the walkability, like the usability of the lawn or of the space?
Of the space, yeah. So you definitely want to look at, and that's part of your right plant, right place, is it a wet spot? Is it a dry spot? Does it get a lot of foot traffic? Is it somewhere that you're just looking up a slope and you just want the slope held in, but you're never going to be walking up there? And you probably don't want to be weeding up there or doing too much maintenance either if it's a steep slope. And you certainly don't want to be mowing. I've seen some very dangerous mowing situations. I don't know if you've ever seen the rope pull back and forth technique that I would like. I'm just going to avert my eyes and pretend that this person's not going to use their foot over there.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen some scary situations. Yeah.
Yes.
So assessing that. And in the book, we have a ratings charts where we have several different attributes of ground covers that are rated. And one of them is stepability or walkability. One is whether it's deer proof or not, drought tolerant or not, and then several other attributes that we rate them by. So, and then you can go in and pick out, I want a ground cover that has pollinator benefits, also is beautiful, and is deciduous. Like, I don't care that it dies back in the winter time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. The charts are absolutely beautiful. You've got 2, 4, 6 of them in the book itself. So there's lots of wonderful information. And you have, how many choices do you have specifically in the book? I think you narrowed it down to 40, if I'm remembering.
Correct. Yeah. So the cover line says 40 profiles, but I snuck in a couple extra in there.
I thought there was a couple more, but
I kind of like grouped a couple because like one of the profiles is ferns, and that's a huge family of plants right there. So I just kind of do a general fern category. And another one where I snuck in a bonus was the creeping rosemary, creeping thyme, because they're just so closely associated and related and interchangeable that I figured I could lump those together and sneak in the 41st one right there too.
Which zones do your plants kind of cover? Matt and I were trying to find, because basically your Washington DC summer is very much a Toronto summer of the heat and humidity. We're probably very similar. So how far zone wise did you go?
So we call it the temperate, and the book is being published globally. So instead of USDA hardiness zones, my publisher asked me to do temperature ranges. So you'll see on there, it'll say coldest it can take, basically. And so I've thrown in a few ground covers that can go way up into zone 2, USDA hardness zone 2 and 3, and then a few that can go all the way to 10, 11. But most of it is going to be that sweet spot from like 4 to 8, right? That most of us are gardening in.
Yes.
Say 5 to 7 is really the temperate zone of most of us who are gardening in most of the U.S. that are, above the deep south and under the tundra.
Yeah, under the tundra. That's great.
Very nice. Sorry, I thought I had a question there, but I think I've just clicked something bizarre. So anyways, so we talk about some soil holding and outcompeting the weeds. Are there any other benefits these ground covers can provide for the soil or the environment or the lawn as an alternative?
So a lot of it is about stormwater retention these days, and storing water on site. So if you are in a residence where you've had a lawn, or previously there was a lawn for 50, 60 years, decades now, it's probably pretty thickly rooted. It's probably a thatch that doesn't absorb much stormwater at all. And the latest, surveys and research on that has basically rated those type of lawns just above concrete sidewalk as far as absorption, sad to say. Unless you're really diligent about aerating and really getting in there and breaking up those roots, it's not absorbing much stormwater. So a lot of the ground covers I talk about, some of them are deeply tap rooted, some are more shallow, and they're really good about holding that stormwater on the site and not letting it rush off right there to our local tributaries and our bays and the ocean and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Because we talk a lot about that when we give our lawn advice, that often comes up on our show about, because everybody's so keen. I always joke about it being the Masters, right? As soon as that golf tournament is on in early April and all those grass seed commercials come on, everybody thinks they need to be outside walking on that wet grass. And we're always like, get off the grass, get off your lawn. You're just decompressing it. When it's not ready for you, and creating that exact thing and then when we get our rain, it's just going to run right off. So it is really important. And I think it is something that people are becoming more and more aware of, is that especially when we have drought conditions, so, making sure the water, when we have it, is staying on site. Because then I'm guessing that the runoff then is slower with ground covers, and then can maybe help water our gardens even, because it's not running off as quickly as it would if it was grass.
Correct. And so if it's on top of tree roots, especially, that's not a great place for lawn. And I'm not anti-lawn. I'm not going to say rip out all your lawn. That's what I did. That's my story. But there is a place for lawn, especially if you have dogs or you have kids that want to practice their soccer, keep that lawn. But where lawn can't grow, especially, or is not recommended, in a ditch or wet spot, is not a great space for lawn. Over tree roots, not a great space for lawn, because you don't want to be running your lawnmower, as you said, compacting those tree roots. You want to either have a light mulching or a light type of, a shallow rooted ground cover is what I recommend around trees, rather than some of the deep rooted ground covers. Right. And they can be a great green mulch, is what I call them when they're that. So you're not having to constantly mulch on top of that tree root zone and work that soil and compact it all the time.
So you use the term green mulch. How do we define a green mulch? Is it just simply like a shallow rooted plant that covers the ground, or just any living plant that helps you or acts like a mulch to protect the soil and the substrate?
Yeah, so it's basically anything that's green, that's covering enough, again, to suppress weeds, hold in moisture, and give a little bit of root aeration in there as a green mulch or green. And that could be a base layer under larger shrubs or trees or even perennials. So it could be that, or it could be just that one layer itself. And that's why I think a lot of in garden design we're missing these days is that base green layer. And that could be, in some cases, you're in a forest and it's been denuded by the deer. They've taken out that bottom layer, and we see that a lot. Or it just could be because people are so in love with mulches, like a wood chip mulch or something, that they are not thinking about that green base layer.
Yeah, I think mulches have become so popular, and I have to admit I'm guilty of it as well. And I think then it creates this a little bit of a catch-22 in that when you then do plant ground covers or like spreading perennials, then they don't go as fast because now there's mulch in the way, right? So then it becomes like, okay, so now I want to transition. I said to Matt before the show, I really like to transition to more of a green mulch, because I'm tired of putting mulch on my garden.
Exactly.
And I get how nutritious it is, and I think it would be more attractive as well. But they already has mulch on there. So how do you, are you literally thinking you have to kind of rake up the mulch, or are there some tips that you have getting started?
Yeah, as you're establishing the ground cover, you don't want to leave bare soil. So that's the catch-22, right? You want
Yes.
the ground to be covered by the plants, but meanwhile, you've got to have something on it. So I just say a light top dressing of shredded leaves is always great. And then you could pull that back as the plants are advancing, or usually they will take over it and consume it themselves. So you're just going to do a light top dressing in the spring and the fall, and then less and less and less each year. So then that gives you a chance for the ground covers to fill in and for you to assess the situation. But the goal is eventually you don't have to do that task in the spring and the fall. That green mulch is already there for you. And I have a friend, a garden designer friend, who says mulch is not a element in your garden.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's just a temporary space holder till your plants fill in, is how we should be thinking of it.
Well, I think there's some nutritional value to it, as long as people are using good quality mulch. So we talk a lot about that on the show, that, that how the importance of a good quality mulch is, that not all mulches are created equal. But yes, I mean, I can see where regular plants are more nutritious and more beneficial. Do you have a couple of favorites for green mulch for underneath plants?
Yeah, one of my favorites is hellebore. And I love to do that, even though it's a little bit of a taller ground cover than most people think about. Under my huge oak trees, it is a great one because it's got one of those attributes that I rate in my book, which is called leaf swallowing. And so over the years, I've experimented with different ground covers that can absorb the heavy leaf fall from the trees and then kind of take it up inside them underneath their foliage. And then it breaks down underneath them. And you don't, again, have to do that one task a year, which is rake out all the leaves, chop them up, and then push them back in. So leaf swallowing goes a long way to make a neater looking garden. So that's one of the taller ones that I like. And I would say for a shallow rooted one, maybe a juga, where it's not rated as an invasive. So different areas, you check your local invasive list, but where it's not listed as invasive, a juga is a nice shallow rooted one that can form a nice thick patch around tree roots, especially like fruit trees, ornamental fruit trees like your cherries and your plums. That is a really nice color echo as well. So if you have like a flowering plum that has kind of reddish leaves to it, pick a juga with a purple reddishness to it, and you got something really nice going there.
That's great.
You mentioned invasive plant lists. Where would you recommend, or where do our listeners go to find such a thing in their area? Is it just your local municipality or state or county?
Yeah, so usually you can just Google your state name and invasive list or official invasives list. You might talk to your local native plant society. They would probably have that available. You could also look online for, if you're in the US, the invasive councils list is online. And again, everything is local. So if it says it's invasive in Florida, doesn't mean it's invasive in New York State, doesn't mean it's invasive in Vancouver. So definitely do your homework, because sometimes people will Google a plant and see the word invasive and freak out. But again, it's local. It's all local. So where it is native, could be Europe, could be Asia, could be here. And people will even call some of our native plants that are native to their area, they'll use the term invasive. And I prefer the term aggressive. So if you're talking about, say, a native plant that's an aggressive spreader, you might use the term aggressive, because invasive typically means something introduced into the area that's taking over, like English ivy. It's a good example of that here.
Right.
Yeah. Or I always think of like the Vinca minor escaping into the woods kind of thing. Yeah.
Yep. And
I think I mean, it is a tricky issue, the invasive plants issue, and I think we have to be reminded that common sense needs to prevail a little bit. If you have that, really, dry spot at the curb and a small area, between the curb and the sidewalk, using something like Vinca or something that might be labeled in other people's minds as invasive, but it's really going to grow well there, versus being foolish enough to plant it, in a backyard that's ravine facing, like that borders the ravine, and knowing that it could jump and escape into the ravine. So I feel like sometimes it's not necessarily the plant's fault. It's maybe the gardener's fault. Like, not to blame people, but I just think, there also needs to be some thinking, because goes back to what you said about the right plant in the right spot. And so that is the right spot. Yes, it's an invasive plant or aggressive plant, but that's a perfect spot for it. When it's bordered by asphalt and curb on, concrete on either side, it's not going anywhere. But, in a backyard where you border with a chain link fence, you border a ravine property, that's not the best place for it, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I would say, especially in your more urban locations, which my first book was on urban gardening, you have a little more leeway unless you're bordering, say, a park, or, want to plant running bamboo next to a neighbor. That would not be so neighborly. But,
yes.
Where it's pinned in, like you're saying, against a curb, against a brick house or a concrete, you have a little more leeway there where it's not going to jump anywhere. To use some of those more aggressive spreaders. And I would call them, even in those cases, problem solvers, because those are plants that are growing where nothing else will grow. So there are some of those, aggressively spreader or invasive type plants that you're like, nothing else is growing there. I need to hold in this soil. It's going to get a bit of traffic, foot traffic. I might even have some bikes coming over here, or, other things that invade the turf on a busy corner like I have. And guess what I have over a manhole cover on my corner? Vinca. It's the only place I have the Vinca, because that's the only thing that will grow over a manhole cover, over like an inch of soil, and in blazing hot sun that gets tons of foot traffic. But I don't want to leave bare soil right out there.
Right. And I think of Lily of the Valley, for instance, right? That dry, shady spot where the corner of the house or the side of the house, that's usually where people talk about having, they love their patch of Lily of the Valley, or when they buy a new house and they're like, what is this? And do I need to get rid of it? And they get advice saying, yes, you need to get rid of it. But it's like, well, do you really? Because nothing else is really going to grow there. You're not going to be able to grow grass there. You can put gravel down if you'd like, but some things get a little bit of and some of the Facebook groups can be challenging, right? Watching the conversations and stuff. So I think, again, just have to common sense somehow.
And that's so true that's where I have my Lily of the Valley, is in the eaves of the house, between two trees and two houses where no moisture is getting, nothing else can grow there. But Lily of the Valley is very much behaving in that spot. It's not going to go anywhere else, but I have a thick patch of it. Looks great. And I would probably have nothing else green growing there at this point, unless I put some containers or I ran irrigation lines. That would be my only other choice for those.
Nice. So we have a couple of questions that have come in. Here we go. So Kelly has written in, are ground covers really expensive? What are the costs of these ground cover plants?
Yeah, so everything is relative.
Yeah.
You can go crazy. So one of my favorite ground covers is epimediums. And there are very inexpensive common epimediums for $3 to $5 for a little quart pint-sized pot, or you can get them pretty readily at garden club sales and that sort of thing, or from a neighbor who has some. And they're nice, slowly spreading, mounding epimediums. Or you can go for those collector epimediums that are $50, $100, $150. Same thing in the hostas, right? You got your common hostas, the plantain lilies, that people are just giving those away on your local neighborhood list. You just pop a note up there saying, I need to fill in a shady spot. Anybody have extra hostas? And they'll say, come dig them. Versus those collector hostas, that's too rich for my blood, some of those. So, yeah. And of course, you can save money by starting from seed or plugs. And I recommend in the book and give a few techniques about starting with the smallest size you can get. So a tray of plugs rather than 2-gallon or larger size plants is going to save you a lot. Say if you want to start a Carex lawn instead of a turf grass lawn, that would be the way I would go, is a tray of plugs and starting with those and at a certain distance. And then you dig and divide over the years to add more to that. And of course, that needs a little patience. If you want to rip out everything all at once and then have all ground covering everything, that's going to be a little bit more expensive. But slowly taking away a little bit of lawn here, replacing a section here, over several years, that's going to be a bit more kind to your budget.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, and that is an advantage of ground covers, is often like more of the traditional ground covers, that they often do come in, like I'm thinking creeping times and things, they do often come in what I would say like a 3 or 4 inch pots, right?
Yep.
Where many other perennials, just your availability is pretty much 1 gallon. And then all of that is soil. So I love the plug idea, because usually if you're using it in dry areas or under trees, you don't have a lot of soil depth. So digging holes that's going to put a 1 gallon pot full of, roots and soil into those holes would be tricky, but getting enough where you're just putting the plugs or you're just putting 4-inch pots in, I think you would have much better success, right?
Yeah, and I think plants adapt better when they start off smaller in a little space, and they catch up. I've done experiments putting a full gallon hellebore next to that little teeny start, and 3 years later, same size. And usually the other one, the one that started off smaller, does better because it was better able to establish its roots, work around the zone, didn't have to be watered as much. That's the other thing I find is the bigger you start off with, the more you have to baby the plants.
Yes.
It's coming from a greenhouse situation or another grower situation where it's been well watered and fertilized. And basically my gardening technique is very laissez-faire, survival of the fittest. I stick you in, I walk away. If you look sad, maybe I'll give you a little bit of attention.
Yeah.
But yeah.
They say that too about trees. We've had that on discussion on same thing. Like when you're planting a 50 mil tree versus a 120 mil tree, the 50 mil is going to do much better because it, it just will, the younger tree, the smaller tree. So yeah, it's good to know that happens with perennials as well and ground covers, because especially, I think you do want it to fill in fairly quickly, right? Like you said, bare earth is nobody wants bare earth.
Yeah. So it depends on what the ground cover is. If it's the type that spreads quickly. And again, in the book, I give ratings for fast spreading versus slow spreading, because you want to pick that for your own situation. You're like, I really need to get this hillside in fast. Or I have a few years, I can plant some annuals amongst it, for summer color as this ground cover is spreading, and let it go for a few years and do that. And then maybe mulch a little bit too around it.
So Anne has also written in, do ground covers get very big, and what is the average height? You were mentioning your hellebores. They're anywhere 12 to 18, or they can get up to 24 inches tall and wide, some of them. But what would you say is the average height of ground covers in general?
So in each of the profiles and in the charts in the book, I talk about low, medium, and tall. So depending on the situation you want for your ground cover. So the average low is, between 2 to 5 inches tall. That's going to be like your ground cover sedums, the creeping thymes we talked about, mosses, and some of the smaller perennials. And then the next step up would probably be what I call the knee high, like between shin and knee high. Are a lot of the ground covers fall into that. And that's usually the flower stem coming up and flowering and dying back. But then they'll have a nice basal foliage, and basil, not like the herb, BASAL. So basal foliage, meaning they have ground hugging foliage that spreads and holds the ground and then sends up a flower one. And that's where I put the rudbeckias. So I think rudbeckias make a great ground cover. Really? They spread by underground stolon nicely. They reseed themselves, and they'll go from part shade to part sun, and even full sun. They're like a wide range of situations. So where you have those tricky spots, right, where you go from a bed that's almost full shade to almost full sun, is hard to transition with the same plant. But rudbeckia is a great problem solver for that. So all of our black-eyed Susans natives do well. And then, of course, there's tons of gorgeous cultivars. But I like the straight species Rudbeckia hirta, especially because I feel like that's a real good goer, right? It stays pretty healthy and thick, is good weed suppressor, and nobody objects to the bonus flowers. You could cut them off and just keep the basal foliage all year long, but you're going to enjoy have the bonus of flowers and have those for the pollinators, the seed heads for your birds, and be able to enjoy those as cut flowers yourself as well.
Yeah.
Very nice.
That is good.
we hit the bottom of the hour. I'm going to jump in and do my little mid-station ID and say thank you, everybody, for joining us here live on Reality Radio 101. Thank you as well if you're listening at home or in the car to the podcast that you've downloaded. We appreciate you as well. I'm Matthew Dressing here with my co-host and co-author, Joanne Shaw, and you're listening to Down the Garden Path. Joanne and I enjoy hosting Down the Garden Path each week, bringing you interesting and relevant topics to help you achieve a great garden. We learn right along with you from our research and from the wonderful guests that join us here on the show, like this evening's guest, Kathy Jentz, author of The Urban Garden and her latest book, Groundcover Revolution, which we're talking about tonight, all about ground covers and creating a lawn alternative. Don't forget, you can spend more time with us down the garden path. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. At Down the Garden Path Podcast is our handle. You can also find us on all your favorite podcast providers. And while you're there, please hit that subscribe button to be notified of new content. And don't forget to like, share, and leave us a comment. We love hearing from all of our listeners. You can always write us anytime during the week, on or off the air. Down the Garden Path Podcast at hotmail.com is where you can find us. As we continue with the show, we do have a couple more questions for you. Monica, and I think you spoke to this a little bit earlier with being on a slope and again protecting the soil, but Monica has asked, does planting ground cover help with erosion? And if so, what are the best plants for this issue? Or are there some best plants for this issue?
Yeah, so erosion is one of the great problems that ground covers can solve. And that's actually why a lot of what we term as invasive plants were introduced to our market. Everything from kudzu vine to our English ivy. The reason we have English ivy is because somebody was like, "Ooh, we need to hold in that slope. Let's bring in this problem solver." And then it took off, and it was a bit too successful, right? But so I recommend a lot of the low growing shrubs that I talk about in the book as great ground covers for slopes. Because those are ones that can fill in, like if you have a sunny slope, I use ground cover roses. So the low growing roses that kind of spill over and make a beautiful carpet of flowers. And then they're great for spreading, and sometimes they'll tip themselves into the soil and make a second plant. Those are great when shrubs do that for you. Of course, you can bend over a branch and help that along. Yeah. So there are a few different shrubs you can use like that. There's one that I didn't include in the book. Like there's bearberry and some of the native ones that are Canadian Pacific Northwest natives and I'm not sure who your listener is writing in from, but that might be something to look into for her as well.
Some of the ground cover, I think of some of the ground cover junipers. Do you cover, some of those, hot, dry?
Especially, It was funny because I was speaking at the Northwest Flower and Garden Show in Seattle in February, and I mentioned junipers as one of my favorite carpeting, low growing, very low maintenance. It's completely set it and forget it in my book. Yes. And some of the new introductions, there's some golden creeping ones. There's some with a bluish tint. There's some with more of the green tint. And the audience was kind of like, meh, juniper. I know. But I was like, you know why it's so common? And you see it at every fast food place and shopping center? Because it works in those situations. But I get why they're kind of bored by it.
For sure. But I think when you see them in the, those drive-through parking lots and stuff, there's like one here and one there and one, right? And I love the line in your book when we'll come back to that because you're pretty direct about like the plants. But, I think if you're putting them closer together and making a carpet, and if you're trying to protect the erosion and weed suppression, because I know several of my clients I think of that had, backed onto a ravine or more of a naturalized property with a slope, they were fighting, garlic mustard, and they were fighting lots of other weeds. And they knew they needed to get rid of that, but they couldn't even go down there to do that, No. So I think we need to, because I'm, certainly not necessarily a juniper fan either, but planted together closer and letting it, kind of take over to prevent that weed, and not only the erosion, but I think the weed suppression is a second bonus there, because it's a really hard place to keep control, right?
And even trying to apply mulch on a slope.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
what are you going to do? Use glue?
Yeah. Until we get a big rain, right?
Exactly. I've seen too many wood chips floating down to the bottom of a hillside. And so in that case, some of those low growing shrubs are pretty much the only thing that's really going to work for you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Nice. Yeah, and I do want to give a shout out to her. I know we've got more questions, but that for people interested in picking up this book of Kathy's, the pictures are very beautiful, and they do give a really great, accurate representation of how she's suggesting you use them in a ground cover mode. And so sometimes I know we can talk about it on a podcast, but sometimes you've got to see it to believe it. So just a shout out that please, consider purchasing her book, as I think it will transform your gardening. So just a shout out for that, because I think that's important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in each of the profiles, I try to do a close up of what it looks like maybe in bloom or one of its other beneficial facets, and then a wider shot of what it's going to look like in a real garden. So that was one of my aims with taking a lot of the photos in the book. About 2/3 of the photos are taken by myself. Was to go into real gardens and where they are in situation. So it's not like, a garden catalog where somebody took Photoshop and duplicated the plant 50 times.
Right.
These are actually how they are growing in a real garden.
So, thank you.
That brings us to Tim's question. Is Kathy's book available only online or stores as well? Saying he's loving the topic and that you've joined us tonight. So where can our listeners find your book?
Yeah, so Groundcover Revolution, wherever you buy books, should be available. If they don't have it, they can order it. And of course, you can order it direct from Amazon or bookshop.org if you want to support your local independent book sellers. Many of the public gardens, like gift shops, are carrying it now. So that I always tell people I love to support local independent bookstores and our public garden gift shops. And of course, you can order it from the publisher directly, which is Quarto, like the number 4, Quarto Publishing. And if you want to do a group order for your garden club, that's the route I would do.
Good.
Very nice.
Dave has written in a good question. This one's interesting. He says, "Hey, Joanne and Matt, doesn't ground cover attract rodents in your yard? It leaves a nice place to nest and hide." Interesting.
Mm-hmm. So that's something I've heard. Like, there's some, I don't want to call it an urban legend. There's one
of those things.
Yeah, there's something spreading around on the internet about that, and so. There is a case that some low shrubbery could hide rodents, but that could be true of every garden, everything growing on your ground. So unless you have concrete, there's going to be, and you're wanting as one of your goals to attract wildlife and benefit wildlife. So you're going to have good and bad wildlife too. But I would say just do the once a year cutback of a lot of the ground covers that you usually do for maintenance in late summer, not late summer, or late winter into early spring. You might cut back your calyxes and stuff, and that's when you can go through and look and see. But I haven't found that to be the case, and I'm in a very urban exposed situation where I know I have a college next to me with dumpsters and some raccoons and others taking advantage of that. And they're not living in my ground covers.
Amazing.
Yeah, we've got raccoons too. So yeah, it's another thing we have in common with DC.
You mentioned cutting some of them back. So do all the ground covers require some sort of maintenance? Do they need to be cut back or pruned or shaped in any way? Or are they just kind of like you said earlier in the show, some of them just being like the junipers, set it and forget it?
Yeah, the junipers are probably your lowest maintenance. And some of the others like mosses and ferns, just while they're getting established, you might need to weed around them or weed amongst them as they're getting established, and do that little top dressing of organic mulch too, as they're getting established. And then some of the others just need that yearly haircut. So you can just do that whack back again at the end of winter, early spring. And that's more of a rejuvenation haircut. And in the last couple of years, I've been experimenting with not doing that haircut. So like with your hellebores, you know, the advice is always to cut back the foliage when it starts to get ratty and yucky to let the blooms show. And that's more because we're liking the neater look than it is for the plant, because I've let it do it itself and the old foliage just dies back. You know, you can go through and pull out a few of them if they look unsightly. Same thing with the epimediums, the same advice where you're cutting back the old ratty foliage because you're letting the new flowers come up and you want them to show better. But if you don't, you know, if you go away for 3 months skiing or something and skip that season, then guess what? Mother Nature takes care of it. And it's more for cosmetic reason and for renewal for you.
Right.
Than it is for the health of the plant.
Right.
Yeah, and that goes back to the whole, you know, needing to put the garden to bed or have it be spotless, but that's not really a garden, you know, it's not like cleaning your kitchen. It's kind of like letting nature be, right?
Yeah, I think when we see those brown, crispy edges on leaves and stuff, we tend to be like, oh, it's dying, it's dead, but it's still doing something. It's performing a landscape function out there. So it's really how much you tolerate. And of course, I talk a lot about in the book about HOAs, homeowner associations, and local municipality or county or state or province, your local rules. So things are changing slowly. So some of them might say it has to be turf grass. Well, a lot of them, they're just happy if it's green ground cover. So you can get away with Carexes and like you said in the introduction, clovers and some of the other lawn mixes will be just as good. So it can be a little bit more lax that way versus going straight to say a prairie look, which might not be okay in the front yards of a lot of places. They still get frowned on. Yeah.
Yeah, they
So-
do.
Ground covers as lawn alternatives. So you were telling us your story was you're not anti-lawn, but you've removed your lawn and created a beautiful ground cover alternative. So tell us about your story, how we might go or our listeners might go through the process of, you know, choosing their ground covers alternatives. What's that journey look like? Is it intensive, or how do we go about creating a new lawn alternative with ground covers?
Yeah, so I would say, you know, open the book, look at a few of the inspirational photos, see which situation you want. Like if I have full shade, but it's dry, maybe I'm going to experiment with some epimediums. I'm going to plug them in a couple places and see which ones I like. Do that for a year or two, and then go back and buy more of those. So see what you like. Also go to local garden tours and public gardens. Look what's successful there in your local areas. I can't, you know, stress more your local public gardens and going on local public tours like the Garden Conservancy hosts and that sort of thing. Seeing what's successful in your neighbors' lawns. I always say carry your camera, which is your phone, right in your pocket.
Yeah.
Don't trespass, you know, stay on the sidewalk, but take a picture. And then you can go back and research that later. You can be like, wow, this whole hillside looks gorgeous and it's not turf grass. What is that? And then you might come home and look it up and see that's the native Pachysandra, or that's the Aronia berry or something like that. And the other thing is, when I was starting, one of the techniques I used was the lasagna or layer method. And you probably talked about it, I'm sure, on your podcast of the easiest way to establish new garden beds is by that smothering and layering with compost on top and then planting into that the next season. And that could be a small area that you expand every year at a time, or you could just do a whole section of your yard and take that out. If you want to go whole hog, so to speak, and just take out that whole lawn overnight, you can also rent the grass roller machines, and they just kind of like zip up your whole lawn like a roller carpet. It's pretty cool watching them, but you know, that's a heavy duty machine. And I would advise getting a helper to do that or hiring somebody. It's really not something that I physically think I could even handle that machine myself.
Yeah, it looks easy to watch it, but it's really, lawn cutter, sod cutter. Yeah, they are a lot of work for sure. So, and when you did, I've done the lasagna method with cardboard. Have you done it with cardboard or with newspaper?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of using the thickest section of newspapers you can get, or double or tripling it. I always say the Washington Post. I used to say the front section, the biggest, thick section, but now it's like maybe 2 sports sections on top of each other. They're getting thinner and thinner these days, right?
Yeah.
Cardboard has a little bit of a drawback these days because a lot of it is treated with a chemical to make it slide. I don't know if you've noticed that.
Oh.
It kind of has like a spray or like a thin layer of plastic sprayed on it, and also the tape and any labels have to be removed.
Yes.
And because it's a little bit thicker, if you use a thicker cardboard, if you put it over tree roots, that can cut off some of the oxygen to the tree root zone. But say if it was in a flat out lawn area, that would be fine.
Yeah.
Or like maybe your vegetable garden plot, that would totally be fine to put some cardboard down. But again, yeah, any of that tape or anything else you don't remove is going to be in the soil the next time you dig. The cardboard will break down nicely because it's tree fiber. I mean, that's what paper is. That's what newspaper is. And newspaper is printed with soy inks. So literally soy ink and tree fiber. So that's why I side with the newspaper.
Yeah. 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 I do remember us having like looking for specific kind of cardboard and, bypassing some of the more waxy ones. And I was careless in a few places of not removing the packing tape. And so then, yes, in subsequent years, digging in going, oh, look, here's some more packing tape, because it obviously doesn't decompose. But it was effective I didn't turn it into I just turned it into a garden. So I got rid of, where it was a hard place that wasn't growing grass well, and just made it into a garden. So yeah, so it's so I think it is an effective way to do it. But I do realize that you need to start because plants are expensive. So you need to start small. And it's not. I mean, I was patient enough, and I think my neighbors thought I was crazy in the sense that it was like all mulch and empty for many months until it got breaking down. So if you are going to start, then yes, I think starting small and knowing that you've got to put good things in the soil like the ground covers and things to get going.
Yeah, and I think the lasagna layer method. If you do that in the fall, like September, October, let that cook, so to speak, over the winter and then come back in the spring. That's like the perfect timing.
Yes.
Of course, I'm talking to you now in springtime and people are ready to go right now.
Yeah, exactly. So now is not a good time to do it, everybody. But unless you're just wanting to do it in small bits, or if you have, sometimes I think people are starting with areas that nothing grows there anyway. So you kind of already have it, ready to go to start using some things. And I know Carl is asking about, I heard the term carpet forming regarding ground cover. What does this mean exactly? Thank you.
Yeah, so that can mean a couple different things. Some of the new trends in ground covers are literally to make the ground covers knit together like a carpet. So you might have like a part shade ground cover over here and a full sun coming over here, and they'll kind of knit together into a mosaic. So that can be one way of looking at carpet. And another one is to actually plant a mosaic carpet ground cover. So you would take like almost a formal square or rectangle that you would tape off or, mark off in your garden and plant a tapestry, literally look like a tapestry rug in your garden of different very low growing sedums and very low growing of the herbs could be in there as well, mixed in. And I've seen some beautiful renditions of that as well.
Yeah. You can really have fun with it. So, that's something they can be, flowering as well, and they can be very attractive. So I think, in a room, when you think of a carpet, it's never necessarily like the design feature, right, in a room. But for a ground cover carpet in your garden can be a feature, right? And I know one of the things I noticed in your book, and I have one or two of them, and they did great all winter, was oh my gosh, coral bells. So you had the caramel, so thinking of things, I think a little outside the box. And you mentioned no one would consider necessarily hostas as a ground cover, but they bigger plants that can really, if you group them, kind of mass plant them. And I know my caramel coral bells, they were pretty evergreen all winter.
Yeah. And they're one of the ones, again, that gets that little bit of crispy edge that you can just give it a little haircut at the end of winter time and it bounces right back for you. I love those heucheras, the coral bells. They're just available in so many new colors and combinations. Just gorgeous, gorgeous.
Yeah.
Always coming out with new ones, which is super exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Kathy, as we are reaching into the last 10 minutes of the show, as we're wrapping up, is there anything you wanted to, shout out or say, or anything close to your heart you wanted to share with our listeners? Perhaps a podcast of your own.
Yeah, so I'm the host of the GardenDC Podcast. So that's all one word, GARDENDC. And we're mostly aimed at mid-Atlantic gardeners, so kind of New York State through North Carolina on the East Coast of the US. But we've got listeners all over the world, and we're pretty much zone 6-7. So if you have a similar zone, I think you have a lot in common with you. And one of our past episodes, about maybe 6 episodes ago, was called Groundcovers versus Groundcovers. And that I was interviewing another ground cover expert, and he is from outside of Vancouver. And so I think that one might be one for your listeners to look out for. If they're really interested in ground covers, that's a fun episode to listen to while we're comparing and contrasting what ground covers we like and our different philosophy about ground covers.
Very cool. That does sound like an exciting episode. And just for all of our listeners, we will put that in our show notes. A link to that podcast as a follow-up to our show. So yeah, thank you so much, Kathy, for joining us here on the show. A beautiful book, Groundcover Revolution, packed with wonderful information and beautiful photos. I hope it inspires everybody to take a look and think differently about their ground covers and how they are mulching and layering their gardens.
Yeah, green mulch. I think that's the big takeaway, right, from today's show, is think about a green mulch. So we don't have to lug those bags anymore, everybody. Or get those big deliveries, for sure. So, and we'll have all your socials and all your information on our in our show notes as well.
Thank you so much, Joanne and Matthew.
Right. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks
I will catch up, I'm sure, shortly.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. Bye-bye.
Bye. And now to chat about our stepping stones. Matt, you had some great ideas for our stepping stone segment today.
I did? Oh, let me jump down into our stepping stones, because do I remember what they are? Just as a reminder, things are warming up today. It's 20 degrees here in the GTA. Garden centers are looking fresh and exciting, so definitely hit your independent garden centers. But the best selection of your fruiting trees and shrubs are out right now. If you are looking for a fruit tree or a shrub, or you are looking to get into some new edibles this season for your garden, now is the time to be looking. Especially, remember, if you have trees and shrubs, they're woody. You're going to find them outdoors at your garden center anyways, so they can be outside. You don't have to baby them like, herbs or some herbaceous fruit or
vegetables,
like your tomatoes. So definitely take another look for your fruiting trees and shrubs, especially. And again, along that line, trees and shrubs, you can plant them now. The ground is workable. They are hardened off. They're out in your nursery outdoors. So if you are looking to add some trees and shrubs, but you're waiting for that May 2-4, there are certain exceptions, your tender, Japanese maples or, something softer like a katsura. You might want
hydrangeas. Yeah, some of the hydrangeas.
Exactly. You may want to watch because a light frost will damage and set them back a little bit for sure. But again, trees and shrubs right now are out there and available. Remember, too, the trees and shrubs, like you were saying, Joanne, hydrangeas. We're going to see some of the hydrangeas definitely, but depending on where you are, as hydrangeas come into bloom, a lot of the growers then release more hydrangeas that they're growing on for the period of sales in those flowers. So don't be dismayed if you see a group of flowers or plants that you like, but the one you're after isn't quite there yet. It's probably coming to whenever it's going to be blooming in your areas when she'll show up, or the greater selection will show up.
Right. And I think even some of the ornamental grasses get held back a little bit because some of them really want heat.
Yes.
So they don't show. So I think people think that, one, if you've got ornamental grasses in your garden and you think it's dead, wait until the beginning of June. Nothing, please don't take anything out of the garden that you think might be dead until the first week of June at least, because many things start late. And it depends on everybody's garden's different. So again, I said this last week, your neighbor across the street who gets full sun and the west sun and the hot sun in the afternoon is different than if your east sun where you just have morning sun. So everybody's garden, even though it's the same plant, it's going to have a different cycle. So sometimes the ornamental grasses get held back a bit at the nurseries because they need some heat, or they're there and they don't look like much because they need some heat to get going. So keep that in mind for sure. So yeah.
Excellent tip about, because the grass
Rose
is
of
right.
Sharon. I think of Rose of Sharon's, perennial hibiscus, butterfly bushes. People are looking for some of those late season things. If they're blooming later in the season, then the chances of them being available first thing in the spring is a little bit less. But it doesn't mean they're not going to come. They're going to be there. So that's something that, people need to understand. There is a cycle and there's a method to the madness. And a lot of things like the Japanese maples are coming from, some of the growers will grow a certain percentage themselves in the winter, in greenhouses and then harden them off to get, so you'll see a little sprinkling of them. But then most of them come from BC or Oregon. So they definitely wait to past, because I've seen some people asking for like more of the rare varieties and things like that, where to find them. They're coming. Those ones are being grown in other countries or other areas. And we want to wait until the chance of frost is passed. And if something does get a little bit of frost damage, it's not your chances of losing it. Like it's not like vegetables, like you said, right? We can't put our tomatoes and pepper plants outside. You might get a little bit of leaf damage, but overall the plant will tough it out and be fine. So, but it's a great point that you bring up the fruit plants, because those go fast, don't they?
They just go so fast. I was touring some local garden centers just before this weekend, and people were leaving with all like the blueberries and the raspberry bushes and the unique ever-bearing strawberry baskets that were coming in. Not that that's woody, but like hascaps and some of the brazzleberries, or that's the bushel and berry is now the new brand, the thornless container varieties, and the espaliered apples and the fruit salad trees. They're all moving very, very fast. So if you're looking for one or a self-pollinating tree or shrub, they're out there now. So don't wait. Right now is the time to strike.
All right. That is great.
As we hit the end, I guess the only other stepping stone we had was, don't forget, sod's available now, but be patient. Don't let your sod dry out. Much like Kathy said, right, with the big plant versus the small plant. Sod is a big plant on open soil, with soil that's been catered to growing that sod. So it does take a lot of water and a lot of patience for those to interface between those two soil textures. So check for sod now as well if you're thinking of doing that. And that brings us to almost the end of the show. So don't forget, we have set out our podcasts on YouTube. So if you're listening, if you're listening live, maybe you don't download the podcast, or you don't download podcast period, but you watch lots of videos on YouTube like many of us do. You can find Down the Garden Path and lots of past episodes, more and more as the weeks go by, being uploaded of past episodes onto YouTube, so you can check us out there. Don't forget as well to check us out on our own websites. You can find Joanne at www.earth.ca and all of her social media links there. And you can find myself at naturalaffinity.ca and all of my social media there. We love hearing from all of you.